you ever wondered about the demon lords of Genshin Impact? Yes, demon lords. You might not know this, or you might be quite familiar. Um, the Archons are all named after demons from the Ars Goetia, a book written by, I believe, King Solomon. And there's been a lot of ponderings over why the Archons share their names with demons. Well, today I want to explore this fact and explore why the Archons are like demons. Now, to begin with, I want to explore them in reverse order. So starting actually with Fontaine, not Sumeru, because I think we have enough information from Fontaine to carry this theory across and get to the one Archon that doesn't quite fit what I'm going for. It's quite apparent which one I'm talking about because he's last, but you'll see what I mean. You'll see what I mean. First, we're going to talk about the Archon of Fontaine, Follicos, which I can't pronounce correctly, so sorry. We know very little about Fontaine, but we do know enough for this theory. We know the Archon of Fontaine represents justice, and that Fontaine has a court system which heavily punishes people that go right of it. Now, Nahida does mention some things about Follicos. She says that Follicos doesn't actually interfere much with the court system. She likes the show. She likes the spectacle of the court. She has kind of turned Fontaine's court system into a razzle-dazzle affair. Now, the way I think the Demon Lords, aka the Archons, work in Genshin is while the Archons themselves seem very nice, very friendly, I think the domains that they represent, they end up either by their own personal influence or by the people's interpretation of the domains ends up corrupting the nature of the domain. Fontaine stands for justice, but from all that we have heard of Fontaine, justice is treated like a play, like the theatre. It is a spectacle. It sounds like people are judged for the sake of being judged, and whether or not there is law or appropriate law involved in that judging is questionable. It sounds like the very nature of justice has been twisted by the Archon, and the people are affected by it. That's what I'm getting. The way the Demon Lords affect that is that by the domain nature, they twist the operations of the land and sort of corrupt the people by their ideals. Fontaine's justice has been corrupted by the Archon. Or at least that's what it sounds like. We haven't gone there yet, but from all accounts of Fontaine, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like justice has been warped by the Archon, and the ideals of the Archon have twisted what it means for justice to be enacted. It is not about law and order, it's about the theatre, the show, the performance, which doesn't sound like how justice should be. Like you imagine justice like a paladin, perhaps, but we've got instead here a theatre troupe. But yeah, that's Fontaine. That's how I feel like, because like demons represent sins and warpings of ideas generally, and I think Follicos has warped the idea of justice. Moving on to Sumeru with Nahida. Now Nahida's an interesting one with this concept of the domains that they hold being corrupted, because obviously she has been trapped in the palace for 500 years. She herself has not had much influence upon her people, but Rukkhadevara did. While I don't think Rukkhadevara led the academia to the place where it was in the current time frame, the fact that knowledge was twisted from something that should be like a personal pursuit to expand one's mind, to learn and to grow, into being something that has been so warped and strictly regulated by the academia, shows that there has been a twisting of ideals within Sumeru. Now, we don't know for certain what Rukkhadevara laid down to the academia before she died, but I think it's safe to say that enough of Rukkhadevara's ideals must have had an influence on the academia to ensure that it resulted in what we got today. It is interesting to think about how knowledge has been twisted in Sumeru, because you're like, you can't twist knowledge. It's not like justice where people can be unfairly tried and unfairly treated. It's not the same thing. But in Sumeru, I think it very clearly demonstrates how something like information and regulation of it can turn into something monstrous. One thing I personally found very strange in the Archon quest was the fact that it sounded like books were banned, but a place like this, where there's clearly thousands upon thousands of books, exists, but people seem to be discouraged on viewing them, of reading them, that this is only accessible to those who study in the academia, if at all, because it sounded like that Alhaitham is the outlier for wanting to pursue reading, where everyone else used the headsets to access knowledge. Knowledge was a consensus database which they could all readily access and use at their leisure. The whole thing is a warping of how knowledge should be obtained, how it should be regulated, and who should have it. It's kind of big brain stuff, honestly. But you can see what I mean. The idea of knowledge as a virtue has been twisted into something that is bad. Now Nahida's in charge, will it change? Will there still be a corruption of knowledge in Sumeru? That is something we're not particularly clear on at this point, but she still has a demonic name, and that means that there may be still a corruption of ideals in Sumeru, whether or not she intends it. But we've got to remember, she is also an avatar of Irminsul, which might also influence how she influences people, and she has a lot to learn. But her actions could lead to something similar happening again. At this time, we don't know, but it could happen. But you can see what I mean, with Rukkhadevara's influence down the ages, twisting and corrupting the domain of knowledge. Arguably, Nahida's domain is dreams, not knowledge, but as the avatar of Irminsul, I would argue that she still represents knowledge over dreams, just because she has access to all of the knowledge in the entire universe on this planet as we know it. Next up is Inazuma with Raiden Shogun. I think this one is pretty obvious how the influence of the Archon corrupts the people around them. A's ideals of eternity caused the Vision Hunt decree. It caused the lockdown of Inazuma. The islands outside of the main island are barely inhabitable because she only cares about eternity in Inazuma. She doesn't really see the islands outside of Arakumi as anything of her concern. Her eternity is here, and the way she wants Inazuma to be is static, unchanging, unevolving, to be the same as it has always been for thousands upon thousands of years, which is a twisted idealism of eternity. I mean, it's an accurate interpretation of eternity, but it is twisted. Now, A's ideals do change in her own personal story quests to be more in line to her sister, but the idea that you can allow in some progress and you can allow in some change, but at the end of the day, A stands for eternity, a never-ending eternity. Whether or not he allows Inazuma to innovate is really yet to be seen. Inazuma is in her eyes, meant to be unchanging. And really, A's like one of the biggest bad guys in this game, honestly. People think she's reformed, but I don't know about that, honestly. I feel like out of all of the Archons, A represents more what it means to be a god, and in the same sense, a demon lord. She doesn't really care about anything but her own principles. She has a sort of like deific mindset, because we have to remember at the end of the day, the Archons are not humans. They are not people. They are entities that have been given godhood, and in a way, I find A represents that sort of mindset better than any of the other Archons, weirdly. She's more what I imagine a living deity to be. And she's really good at it. But yeah, her ideals of eternity have twisted Inazuma to be what it is today. Whether or not it changes because her ideals have changes is yet to be seen, but A is still restrained by the robot, by the Shogun. If she wants to change the Shogun's ideals again, she has to go battle it again. So it's very unlikely that Inazuma is going to change off this path that he has chosen, even if it's to a great extent, because that's not what she stands for. And her ideals could be twisted again back to how it was. And if it does go back to the way it was, she won't need to battle the puppet again. Next up, Leeway. You're probably wondering how Leeway is a twisted portrayal of contracts. How has Zhongli's influence twisted Leeway? Well, I was thinking about this for a very long time. This has been in my head for a while. But Leeway, out of all of the nations we have visited thus far, has a severe poverty issue. It really does. If you're not too familiar, Ningyuang's backstory is she grew up in poverty, and she had to pick things up off the beach to sell them to people to bring in money. Like, she scrimped and saved for years to build the Jade Chamber, and it's such a triumph for her because she came from poverty. Like, you listen to a lot of the stories of like NPCs and characters in Leeway, and there's so many people going into debt or losing money. Like, the whole contract system that Leeway has is not actually beneficial for it. It's remarkable. We meet so many dead children in Leeway as well, and like deserted settlements. There's no real big villages outside of Leeway Harbour in Leeway. Everywhere else has been destroyed that has been recently settled. People come to Leeway and work dozens of jobs. It's just, there's a huge poverty issue in Leeway, and it's barely acknowledged, besides when people are telling you, oh, I've just brought up this business because because the person running it went into severe debt. Wow. Now you might be like, oh, I'm sure the other regions have an issue with poverty. Well, we're told from Al Haytham that poverty in Simaru isn't an issue, even though it totally is if you live in the desert. And in Mondstadt, the church actually leads a regular charity drive to help people that are disadvantaged, like the old, the orphaned, or the impoverished. And Simu is meant to have a similar system of subsidizing, where they subsidize the people in a sort of meritocracy sort of way. But there's clearly a social system in place in Simaru. In Azuma, it seems like if you live on the main island and are not an outlander, you're fine. Obviously, you've got someone like Ito, who is poor, but Ito seems to do fine. He works like what 2 days a week, and he seems fine. You've also got the people who don't live on the mainland in Inazuma. Like I said, A doesn't really care about the other islands, so it's kind of difficult to treat Inazuma the same as Mondstadt and Simaru that clearly have systems in place. It doesn't seem like Liyue has any systems to deal with poverty in place. They have complicated bureaucracy, and it's like all built around contracts and gaining money and stuff. Like, it's not super explored in the game, but it is really noticeable that anyone who is really, really poor comes from Liyue. It just stands out to me a lot that Liyue has a secret poverty crisis. Because they're very money focused, and you could say like this is just the problem of capitalism, I guess. You have a system dedicated to capitalism. There has to be someone on the bottom. I don't know if the game developers meant to portray Liyue as this. I'm pretty sure they didn't. But the fact that it is the only place with really bad poverty out of the regions we've been to does make it stand out, and that's how I think while Zhongli might have not meant for it to happen, the methods of contracts and deals and bargains has been twisted. And at the end of the day, if you're not good at making contracts or making deals or being mercantile, which is what Liyue is all around, it makes sense that you will be on the bottom ring of society. It makes sense that someone like Ningguang, who grew up poor, managed to build herself up because she was good at that. But it means it's a system that doesn't support people who aren't good at it. It's something to think about, at least. And that's how I think contracts have been warped in Liyue. It has been warped and twisted so that it has caused poverty to exist in Liyue, where it doesn't exist to the same extent in the other nations. And it really stands out when you look at the characters and the NPCs in Liyue in the game. If you disagree, if you think there are examples of extreme poverty in the other regions, do comment below. I know the desert region in Simaru is the exception, but the desert region in Simaru is treated very weirdly. And arguably they still get healthcare for free. We do commissions that deliver healthcare for free. It's just because of trade in the desert, it's a bit weird. But that is a different issue. That's more to do with the region's politics. Liyue clearly has a problem with contracts. Last up is Venti. Venti is sort of the odd one out, because how do you corrupt with freedom? Now, arguably, Mondstadt has been corrupted with freedom sort of in its history. The nobility of Mondstadt allowed slavery to happen within its walls. There was a whole corruption with the nobility, with the running of Mondstadt. Venti had to come and sort it all out. Like Venti's whole method of letting Mondstadt be free to govern itself has meant that Mondstadt has been vulnerable to corruption and the influence of certain people in its past. Now, present day Mondstadt, I haven't seen any issues, or there isn't any hint of issues besides everyone in Mondstadt being raging alcoholics. But besides that, I can't think of anything. Venti is sort of the odd one out because of his association with the Thousand Winds, which could suggest while he has the name Barbados, he might not be a demon lord in the same sense that the other ones are demon lords. Sort of like how Nahida is an avatar of the Irminsul and might not be a full demon lord either. It really depends what they're going for with the whole demon aspect, but I do see a pattern of the Archon's domains being twisted in the regions. It is there. I mean, you could argue it with leeway, maybe, but I still think it is there. There is a corruption of contracts there. In Mondstadt, I don't know. Let me know what you think. Is there a perversion of freedom in Mondstadt? I can't think of anything. I think that Venti is the odd one out of the Archons, though. I think because he is meant to be potentially related to the Veins, or whatever they're called, that might mean that Mondstadt cannot be corrupted by him because he is of the previous order and not of really the current order under Celestia. But there's so many questions about Venti that we don't really know enough about him. He doesn't even have a second character story. There's a lot that we still need to know. But if you have any ideas about how freedom is being warped in Mondstadt, do comment below. Do let me know, because obviously I don't know everything. I'm quite basic. I don't do huge researches into this. This is just my thoughts. And I do predict that when we get to Natlan, that will be twisted by the aspect of war. Well, I mean, war is kind of messed up to begin with anyway, but it is also going to be twisted to be something that it shouldn't be. And when we get to Shesnaya, it will also be twisted by the Terexa's aspect. I mean, we can sort of see with the information how in Shesnaya it might be twisted by the Archon's influence. Like, I think she's meant to be the Archon of Love, which it sounds like she has no love for anything anymore. She has been disenfranchised, you could say, to not love or care about anything, which affects the way she runs Shesnaya. You can see hints of it there within the story, but it's too difficult to say at this time. That's my thoughts. Anyhow, if you have any thoughts on how the Archons are more like demons than gods, do let me know below. Comment. Do like this video if you like. I'll do more of my own head thoughts videos if people enjoy this. And I think that's all for today. Let me know what you think. And I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.